Hey Kylie, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Callan, I am so great. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I know, I'm so excited. We were talking a little bit before how this is kind of like a full circle moment in like the podcasting world because you and I talked like 2 years ago now when you were working somewhere else around podcasting and you got me on as a guest and now I'm
Mhm.
having you on as a guest and I just love the full circle moment.
I do too. It's so sweet. It's so easy to feel so isolated in this online space, but when we have moments like this, it feels less, the world feels a little bit smaller, and I like that.
Yeah, yeah. Being a podcasting is my favorite like way of communicating. We can like chat, have a really good conversation, and everybody feels filled up. Okay, so you are like a podcasting queen. You've been in this world for a minute and you've worked with some very big names, which we talked about right off the top. I'm I'm wanting to dive in all about podcasting with you. So let's start off with why do you think brands and businesses should be using podcasting as part of their marketing strategies? Because a lot of people are starting to pivot in this direction.
I love this question. I really just feel that there's no better way to nurture your audience. I mean, not only are you giving them an opportunity to get to know you, to get to know your brand, get to know your values, and hear you as a thought leader, or if you have a brand, your owner as a thought leader, or head of marketing or whoever. But it also allows them to like almost feel like they've become your friend. I mean, how many times do we hear like, oh yeah, so and so? I mean, people referencing, oh, I heard it on a podcast, like it's their friend telling them over coffee. So that's something that I love. The other piece is podcasts so become part of somebody's routine. Every Tuesday, let's say every Tuesday I go on a run or I go on a walk. And guess what? I'm bringing this podcast with me because that's what I do. I habit stack and I always listen to it and it's downloaded in my phone. So you really are integrating into their whole life. It becomes so part of that. And that's why, when we do see brand partnerships for podcasts, people are eager to do them because people buy from podcast hosts, because they trust them. It's like this new level of trust. I know that YouTube is so great for certain podcasters. People are very excited about it right now. But at the end of the day, like, Callan, are you a 90s kid and an 80s kid?
Oh, I was born in the 80s, but I grew up in the 90s.
All
So
right. Okay. So I was born in the 80s. Same thing. Grew up in the 90s. I bet we're the same age. But
yeah.
it's like we grew up listening to the radio station, and podcasts are basically the same thing that we grew up on and that people have been listening to for so long that they're here to stay. You know what I mean? It's just that we can curate them now and have them in our pocket with us.
100%. I love something that you just said when you said habit stacking, because that is so true and so on point. Like, Pivot Podcast is one of my favorite podcasts with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. I talk about it all the time. I, without a doubt, every Tuesday and Friday when they release their episodes, like, that is how I start my day on those days. And like, I haven't really decided who the Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are. That kind of have a bit that I mix through and certain ones that are like either seasonal or whatever. But Tuesdays and Fridays, like clockwork, I am listening to them and I trust them explicitly. So like everything that they do, I'm like, they are magical and amazing. And if you can become that person who's the
Mhm.
earworm in somebody's ear, podcasting is like the new age, like pirate radio. Back in
Mhm.
the day, you used to have that obscure like person you listen to on the radio and you just love their personality. And now podcasting gives you that access to people to be the friend in their ear and to talk to them and to build that trust on such a intimate way that is so different than
Mhm.
video or so different than other things because you can multitask when you're podcasting. You can go to the gym, you can
Mhm.
be in those moments of like, okay, I'm taking a break from my set, but I'm also like actively really engaged in what's being talked about in my ear. And so I can focus on a different level than if I was like watching a video or something like that. So I appreciate that habit stacking. I'm going to take that one and run with it. What are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're trying to grow their podcast and how can they avoid them?
Well, first of all, you and I were talking about SEO in kind of a different platform, but it comes full circle. One thing I do see as such a mistake is one, people naming their podcast something way out of left field doesn't really explain what the podcast is about, and it's not serving them from a searchability standpoint. Like when you are naming your podcast, think about what the people are going to be searching. For me, people want to know about podcast growth. So they're going to type in the search bar podcast growth or podcast downloads. I'm going to show up because my podcast is literally named Podcast Growth Tools. Now, I want to speak to those of you who are maybe already have a fun, whimsical name. And also, what I'll say is if you have, I'm really talking about like business or brand building or that type of thing. I mean, when it comes to storytelling, there's a little bit of a different approach there. But when we're talking about business, that's you really want to be thinking, what are people searching? And if you already have a name and you're like, ugh, it's not ideal for searching, you can actually go and edit your name in your podcast platform by just so for instance, one of my clients has a podcast named Wine After Work, which is cute and I like it. It's specifically for women in AEC, in the agriculture or architect, engineering and construction, maybe AEC. But she just went in and edited her name, Women in AEC, Wine After Work. She didn't change her marketing, nothing. She just changed it in the platform. She didn't even tell anyone. It's just there. Same artwork, same everything. But that's gonna be what people are searching. So that's something to think about. The other thing is I see too many people rushing through titles or only letting ChatGPT create their titles. And then same with their episode descriptions. We have to slow down. You need to understand what keywords, key phrases your audience is searching, and then think how you can infuse them into your titles. How can you infuse them into your descriptions as much as possible? And so that's really one mistake I see is we're not optimizing that. And Apple, Spotify, they're their own search engines. So think about it that way at all times. I'll pause there and then maybe I can share another one. I'm trying to think
Yeah.
on the spot.
Those are really, really great because SEO, a lot of it does come back to search engine optimization. And if you are creating a business-based kind of podcast, not just like a whimsical chatty Cathy one, then you need to be able to be searchable. And pardon me, if you don't have that capability for somebody to come on and look for you and find you organically, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like this podcast alone, I get so many people coming to it just because it's the only one that is a queer business podcast, specifically talking about the things in entrepreneurship that I am talking about. And I named it the Business Gay Podcast because it's business, I'm gay. And so many people have come to me and like fallen into my DMs or like emailed me being like, you're the only podcast they found that is doing this. And they just literally looked on Apple or Spotify or whatever. And that helps me because I find guests, I get listeners. And so it really pays to pay attention to those little things that make a difference that you might not think make a difference. But like, trust me, it's going to impact you. If you don't have a name, quote unquote, like a name, do not name your podcast your name because that's kind of reserved for people who have already built something in their business. You're starting from scratch. You need all the help you can get.
That's such a good point. I actually wanted to circle back to that. For instance, Amy Porterfield, literally today that we're recording this, went from online marketing made easy for 16 years to the Amy Porterfield show. She didn't do that on day one, and good for her. I mean, you don't want to. Jasmine, like the Jasmine Star show, if you want to move in that direction, you can. And that's the beautiful thing. You don't have to have this podcast name forever. Be smart about it right away, though, if you're looking for growth. Another thing I wanted to say is that I would like to see more podcasters start working to build their email list from episode number one. Because I am I mean, I come from the world of Amy Porterfield. So what do you think? I like an email list. I like a big email list. And so you are never too small to start. And here's what I'll say is when you are small and you start to get subscribers, they are so loyal to you and that's another way to create super fans. But if you need to reach out and talk to them or send an offer or send some piece of nurture content to them, now they're on your email list. You can do that directly. So I highly, highly recommend if you're starting out or if you have a little bit of traction, but you don't have an email list, get your listeners onto your email list. It will take your relationship with them to the next level.
Okay, this is perfect because the next question I wanted to ask was about building email lists and quizzes. So like why are interactive tools like quizzes so powerful for audience growth and like lead generation and how can they be used effectively? Because I know you helped Amy Porterfield like really grow her list and she is kind of like the email list queen, but like why are these specific tools so important, especially when you start, even though you're like, oh, it's only a couple listeners, but like that grows.
I love this question. So, a podcast centric quiz specifically is is so good I'm going to kind of teach you two ways to do it briefly. One, I'll teach you if you're really new and you don't have a huge back catalog of episodes, but then I'll also talk to you, those of you who do have maybe, I would say like 50 or more episodes to choose from. So maybe you've been podcasting for almost a year or something like that. So let's talk about that. So if you've been podcasting for a while and you do have a back catalog of episodes, when somebody comes to your show as a newbie, they might not know where to start. It can be overwhelming to choose from 50 episodes. Or I think about a woman I just spoke to. She has 400 episodes. Somebody new coming to listen is like, I don't even know where to start. So a podcast quiz is a wonderful way to give them a curated playlist of where they should start based on their where they are in their journey. So when I think about creating a podcast centric quiz, I think about two bookends. I start with who is your ICA? You might have two or three or four. Great. Those are basically your results, right? So you have four different ideal customers. That's result one, result two, result three, and four. And you craft the quiz based on the details you want to know about those people. And then the other bookend is what are you offering them when they go through the quiz, through the nurture sequence, then what are you offering them? Is it more free resources? Is it a low ticket offer? Is it hopping on a discovery call? Is it a product, an app? I mean, there's so many things that you can offer, but if you know those bookends, building out the center of all that is so juicy. And this is going to give you not only drive people to your podcast, new and old listeners, because there people love to take quizzes. Like quizzes they are not going out of style. People always want to know their personality type or what percentage they are to XYZ. So not only is it going to give you that, it's going to give you really important detail about your audience. You might think that you have that ICA number three or ideal customer number three is who is in your audience the most, but you might find out that the beginner is actually who's listening to your podcast most. So it's going to give you tons of details there, and then it also nurtures them. So again, it takes that relationship and it makes it even deeper, and then it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, by the way, I have this great resource that I think that will serve you so well, whether it's paid or free. So that's why they're so powerful. The other thing when it comes to like ad cost, quizzes, is it the CPC?
Yeah,
It's
cost per click.
significantly, yeah, it's significantly cheaper than other types of ad spend that you can run because people like to take them and they're free. So that's something to think about. And then the other thing, if you don't have a huge backlog of episodes, you can still create a quiz like this. There's something, gosh, I'm blanking on the website right now, but basically it gives you a score. And so you might be like, or it can give you an audit quiz or a score quiz. So I'm going to blank, or I'm not going to come up with a very clever score quiz for you right now. But basically, you can do that instead and say you're 70% to XYZ, and then you can still have the podcast playlist as a way to improve their score. So listen to these episodes to support you in getting to 100% for whatever. Does that
I
make
see. Yes,
sense?
I hear what you're saying. It's like
Okay.
with this podcast specifically, it would be like I interview tons of different types of entrepreneurs across the spectrum in different areas and fields and this, that, and the other. But it could be specifically like what area are you looking to improve as your entrepreneur? Like where are you? oh, here's my episodes on
Yeah.
venture capital, or if that's where you're at, you're looking to be fundraising and all these things. Okay, well, here's like 5 episodes. Start here, and that'll help build your knowledge over here. Or, oh, if you're a brand new beginner, here's a couple great episodes that'll help fill in some of those gaps around building email lists and starting things and kind of starting at like a more basic level, whereas raising capital is a very different level. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, leading people to the right resources for them and then allowing them to grow, and then they'll want to go listen to other episodes. And it works when you have not a ton of episodes, but also when you have a lot like Amy to help guide the audience to build that
Mhm.
know, like, trust. Because after they've built it with the episode you recommended, then they'll go listen to the other episodes as well because
Yeah.
they want to keep, kind of that habit building.
hmm Exactly. And the way that I work with my clients in building out these quizzes is we have this beautiful nurture sequence on the backside of taking the quiz that does make them become a super fan of the podcast. There's one email that's wholly devoted to what the podcast is, how to make sure you are following, subscribed, automatic downloads. So you're kind of bringing them along that journey. And yeah, eventually it leads to people who are showing up every single week for your podcast.
Yeah. So, okay. So, quizzes, SEO, what are beyond these and like maybe beyond social media? What are some other high impact yet
Mhm.
like overlooked ways to promote your podcast that maybe people aren't thinking about? Because I know you're crafty.
I am crafty, scrappy. What did I did I just call myself crappy? I think I was like combining crafty with scrappy and called
Yes.
myself that. So well, here we are. Okay, one thing that I love is co-marketing. So yes, being on other people's podcasts is like a it is work. It worked 20 years ago, it worked 10 years ago, it works today. Get on other people's podcasts. And I will say, Callan, at the beginning of this, before we push record, we talked about finding your little communities and how it feels so good to connect with people who just like get you. And I do feel 2025 is the year of podcast collaborations. Like people are excited to support each other. It's not just about their podcast or their business. They're like, how can we collaborate and make this work? So go out there, get on other people's podcasts, and then find ways to co-market. So when like Callan, you're going to come on my podcast. And so we're doing a podcast swap, which is so great. But when I send over all the details for you coming on, you'll notice I give you a Google Sheet that basically says, I am so excited to share this content. I know it's going to be top tier. I would love to invite you to help me market it. And here are all the ways that we can do that. And then I give you a checklist that literally says, do you want to do a newsletter swap? Do you want to do an Instagram live? Do you want to do a podcast ad swap? I mean, I have like a full list. And then at the very bottom, I also have none at this time. Thank you very much, or something like that. It's just kind of an easy, like, okay, you can hop out of here if you'd like. But that is a really powerful way to just let them know that, hey, we're going to create this content anyways. People are always looking for content. So why don't you invite them a little bit earlier on in the process to help them start thinking like, oh, she would create newsletter content for me that I just need to like upload and send. Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I'd love that. It's like one less thing that they have to do, but you're still promoting you, and you are the expert on my show anyways. So why don't you want to position yourself that way? So I love just thinking about that. How can I invite them in really early on to share this with me and know that they have a little bit of a task as well when they come on my show. So that's one. And then another thing that I love to do is if you have traffic to your website, which Callan knows all about that and he's an expert in. You should be optimizing your website with pop-ups and lead magnets that are basically just podcast playlists, bundles, whatever it might be, because you've already created the content. And then you just bundle a few of your episodes together and say, hey, I just created this bundle. Now I'm trying to give you copy for a pop-up that is not snappy, but make it snappy.
No, but I love it. I'm like
The
actually
basic,
taking notes over here.
oh, I love hearing that. Honestly, you can make it so easy. You can put it together in a PDF listing out the 5 episodes that fall into this bundle, right? So if it's a list building bundle, here's 5 episodes on list building that you need to binge right now. Or if you want to get really simple, just put it into a delivery email, link up the 5 episodes, boom, your lead magnet is done. So thinking about, and the way I like to do this, I'm going to take this a step further, and it's identify your top performing web pages. So maybe depending on how big your website is, if you can identify like 10 to 20 of your top performing web pages, they get the most visits, optimize those pages specifically. And if you can create a bundle that aligns with that specific page, the content on that page, even better. So, Callan, you help people with SEO. You know how important SEO is. So, let's say somebody has done a really decent job of creating SEO rich blog style show notes, and they're getting traffic to a show notes page or a blog style show notes page all about list building. Again, you would put a pop up on there that says, I see you're loving this content. If you want to take it a step further, grab this list building audio bundle or something like that. Or for instance, a different one that's kind of very different than that is we did this for Amy, and one page that's pretty well visited was her careers page. So we literally took one episode that is about where she's talking about what it's like to work on Team Porterfield. And we put it in the pop up. Hey, I see you're interested in working for Team Porterfield. Want to hear more about what that's like? Put your details here and I'll send you an episode all about what it's like. And then we just send it to them. So it's not like far left. It's very specific to that web page if you can do that. If you can't do that, still putting together a bundle is a great way to attract those listeners, get new subscribers, and then get new downloads and new listeners.
Okay, so there was so much goodness in here. Like I'm just like my brain is just like process, process, process. Yes, having a pop-up and like thank you for reminding me because I don't always run a pop-up on my website, but I'm like, oh,
Mm.
I really should get on top of like putting together like a package episode of like here's the top 5 episodes of the podcast or top most listened to episodes. And in saying that, I actually was my episode being on the Amy Porterfield podcast was listed for quite a long time as one of her top 5 episodes to listen to on her website. And I have like a screenshot of it because I was like, yeah. What?
Yep.
And those things are just really cool and it helps people kind of figure out what they want to listen to. Going back to your first point about being on other people's podcasts, yes, yes, yes. Because if I'm looking for guests on my podcast, other people are also looking for guests on theirs. And I've had many successful podcast swaps, not in a sense that like that's how we come into it, but it's like, oh, you have one as well. Like, yeah, I'd love to talk if it lines up. Like, you're not going to
Yeah.
line up on everybody's podcast because, I'm more business technical. I'm not going to go and just gab about whatever. But I've had a number of successful ones that way, and it's always great because I have an email list, they have an email list. We're going to
Mhm.
talk about each other and promote each other, and there's always going to be a couple people that trickle over, and it's like, oh, these things align, and I want to listen. And borrowing other people's audiences is one of
Mhm.
the best ways to build a following, with the caveat of you do or should have that pipeline kind of set up, whether that's just a website and like a simple email capture, so that at least there's somewhere for those people to go when they do
Mhm.
come over and find you. But yeah, I fully agree that podcast swapping, especially going into 2025 and beyond, I think it's there's a shift back towards community, and it's a way that people are being able to kind of engage in that. Okay, diving a little bit deeper. I'm bad at this. I don't really track my stats. Maybe I've been podcasting for too long. I've been podcasting for 5 years now, maybe 6 years. How can tracking tools like a UTM parameters help marketers and podcasters gain deeper insights into their audience behavior and improve strategy? And I don't even know these kinds of things. I kind of look and I'm like, okay, that's how many people listened, but I consider myself more of a casual podcaster, not like a hardcore focused business podcaster. So I'm really
Mhm.
curious as to what you might have to say around this.
Yeah, so I think, it's easy to overlook these because, oh, you have to make them and then you have to like make sure they're set up so that there is some, technical setting up to them. But the beautiful thing about understanding where your audience is coming from is that you can pour more into what that platform may have delivered to you, or you can systemize your efforts. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in, I have to be here and I have to be here and I have to make sure I, you know, communicate with the people over on Threads and Instagram and LinkedIn and Pinterest. But if you understand that, oh, you know what? LinkedIn is actually not working for me, but Pinterest is really showing up for me, then spend more time there. That tells you that your listeners, your ideal customers, they're hanging out over there. So really understanding where the traffic is coming from, and you can use UTM links to really understand this. That's important. One way that I really like to use these, so the way that I work with my clients is we create a quiz together and then we turn that quiz into a podcast promo week using the quiz as kind of the center of that podcast promo week. Because I'm all about treating your podcast like a product, just like you would launch anything else. Do the same with your podcast. And so when I sit down to create a podcast promo week, for instance, there's, maybe you do a banner on your website, or there's a certain pop-up, or you do an Instagram post or a LinkedIn post, or you send a newsletter to a segmented list, or you run ads. Like, those are all different marketing efforts. And when you can create specific UTM links for them, at the end of your promo week, you can sit down and go, okay, what worked? What was worth my efforts? Where was the traffic coming from? Because if I do another podcast promo week, I would like to maybe make my promo week a little skinnier. So where can I trim the fat? Oh, these UTM links are going to give me that information. So that's how I like to use them specifically.
Okay, okay, gotcha. So it's just getting all the details and nuts and bolts, and don't feel bad if you don't do it, everybody, because I don't do it.
A
Because
hundred
sometimes,
percent.
because sometimes when you're a
Yeah.
one person show,
Hmm.
it can be difficult. But when you have the knowledge and know how, or you're like Kylee and you've done it, and have somebody like Kylee to walk you through it, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of set up
Hmm.
those nuts and bolts pieces.
I will say that I'm so glad you said that because honestly, I've worked with some fairly sizable companies and most of them don't do it. Most of them don't. But here's what I'll say. I know Veronica Romney, check into her. She's amazing. She is like the marketing queen and she is all about the UTMs. And when I started working a little bit with her, she really drove it home for me and I started to see the value in it. But you're absolutely right. Don't worry about this if you're just starting out, but keep it in the back of your mind. Play with it from time to time. I mean, you can create a UTM link for free, and so play with it. See what happens. See if you can track it, and all that good stuff. So that's a great point. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked about, kind of starting a podcast, building ways you can build, using quizzes, building your email list. But at the end of the day, eventually, I assume the reason people are making podcasts are for fun, but also from our standard we're talking about now is business. And at the end of the day, you need to make money with a business. So, do you have any ideas, or what are some of the most underrated monetization strategies that creators and businesses should be leveraging when they have a podcast or when they're creating a podcast?
So I am going to be upfront about this. I'm not the person, excuse me. I'm not the person who's going to talk about brand partnerships. I have other people I can show you the way to who are really good at that. Same with like ad insertions from networks or even like Libsyn allows you to run ads or Spotify for creators. That's great and I think there's definitely a time and place for those. I am all about using your podcast to promote your products. So, anytime you can, that's why I'm such a big fan of using your podcast to drive subscribers, get them onto a welcome sequence. Maybe you offer them a low ticket offer at that point. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just nurture them. And then when you have a big launch, they're there. Another fun way that you could actually monetize is maybe let's say you have like 900 downloads for an episode in a month. I mean, that's so great. Let's say you have 200. Let's say you have 9,000. What if a segment of those people joined you for a monthly membership call and make it so easy. All you do is host a Zoom for like, I don't know, $47, $67 every single month, and you jump on with them. You can talk about your podcast more in depth, about the episodes you release that month. If you had a guest on, maybe you invite them on. You can dive deeper into it. You can host a Q&A. I mean, let's say you have, like I said, 900 people who generally listen to an episode. What if 100 of them wanted to pay you $47 every single month for this little bit of extra, support, guidance? Oh, I get to do Q&A with you. Oh, I get a little bit more from your guests. That is a really fun way to play around with making a little bit of quick money with a little bit of a low lift,
Yeah.
especially if you have guests. Just invite them on and banter back and forth, have fun. And yeah, people can just do month to month payments. And I know there's like Patreon and things like that. And I think they're pretty, and people are also doing Apple subscription, which I think is great. This is kind of a fun way to support your audience and then also nurture them. So continue to nurture them. And so let's say that they have been coming to these monthly calls every month, and then you are going to sell a big ticket offer. Those are probably going to be your hottest leads. They're going to be like, absolutely, take my credit card. So
Definitely.
that's kind of a fun way to play with too.
That is, yeah, a lot of podcasts, especially like really focused niche or specific podcasts that's very successful for them. They can definitely do that. I know the podcast I was part of before this, the Game and Going Deeper podcast, we had memberships and all that kind of stuff, and we definitely did that to support the community and everybody who wanted to be involved. And Apple like subscriptions, we would release episodes early, and it's a really like the membership can take a lot of time and effort and energy, but the kind of low bar of offering subscriptions on your Apple and then allowing them to either get episodes early or even having like secret special episodes just for them. It's like, $1.50, $2, $5. Like you can make it whatever your monthly subscription cost is, but it's so low that that little bit amount does end up adding up because that's like at the end of the month or the end of the year or whatever, that could end up being like your cost to run your podcast. And as long as
Hmm.
it's like a self fulfilling loop, then that way you've kind of built that security in. I will also say that some other low hanging fruit for monetizing your podcast, because I'm kind of blanket the entrepreneurship. There's not one specific thing that I focus on. And what I think works really well for me, because I'm also like not high maintenance, is affiliate marketing in terms of the
Hmm.
ads that I run off the top. So I don't get paid specifically for that ad to run a certain amount of times. I have an affiliate link that if somebody goes through and purchases that product, I get a little bit of a kickback from that. And that, like, if somebody ends up doing it, it makes money. If not, it's all good. But over time, I'm not losing an opportunity of making that money because that affiliate link is always going to be there. And
Hmm.
not that a ton comes in from my ads, but like enough has come in over the months and years that it's like every little bit kind of helps. And as the podcast grows, that's only going to equal more. And those are really low bar. They're really easy
Hmm.
to implement, and you don't need to upkeep them because that link is always going to be relevant and valid. And that's another way to kind of play with different brands and different things without needing to like really work on a deal or tell everybody what your numbers are and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff.
I love that. And that kind of makes me think of how we talked about earlier, how that's why affiliate links and things like that do so well on podcasts because people trust you and they're like, oh, you like this brand of collagen? I have to go get it, even though it has nothing to do with what you actually teach on your podcast.
A
But the
hundred
other thing I
percent.
wanted to say is yes to affiliates, especially if you're just starting out or if you're fairly new, do that. Like you can go to so many websites and just click the affiliate link and get a code within minutes. However, the cool thing beyond that is if you do find, hey, you know what, I'm actually getting some traction with XYZ affiliate, then you can reach out to them and say, hey, I've been actually promoting your XYZ for a long time, and I've had this really great success. Let's talk about a brand partnership. I also have a newsletter I can promote you on, or a social media following, and then they are actually going to be really enticed. Be like, oh, you're already doing this for us. You have like proof is in the pudding here. Yeah, we'll pay you, $1,000 a month or something to promote for us and create this brand partnership. So it's a good way to just like get your foot in the door and then kind of grow from there.
Yeah, using that leverage that you build for yourself. I love it. That's great. Okay, we've talked a lot and covered a lot of things today. Is there any kind of like last suggested words of wisdom or little like nuggets that you wanna share before we kind of wrap things up here?
I think two things I just want to reiterate is one, have fun with collaborating. This is 2025. We are coming together as a community in a unique way. So I think podcasters are all excited to be in here together and just be excited to support each other. So look for opportunities like that and think about it as like more of a co-collaboration than versus like I'm on your podcast or you're on mine. Like think about fun ways to support one another. And then the other thing is just build that email list. Use the podcast to grow your email list. Use the email list to grow your podcast. It goes hand in hand.
100%. Kylie, this has been so great. You're full of so much amazing knowledge, especially when it comes to podcasting. Where can folks find out more about you and your services and what you offer and how you can help people build their podcasts?
Yeah, so I created a fun little lead freebie for you guys that are listening. If you guys want to learn a little bit more about the strategies I recommend for growing your email list and your podcast together, you can head to podcastmarketinghub.com/playlist and you'll get a great free resource there. So check that out. You can also check out my podcast, Podcast Growth Tools. I'm going to have Calan on there, so we'll let you know when that airs as well. And then I do discovery calls if you guys want to talk further about your podcast, your brand, and growing it. And you can just find that at podcastmarketinghub.com.
Magical. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kylie, for being a guest. Like I said, this has been a full circle moment, and I absolutely loved having you.
Thank you, Callan. I love being here.